Thank you and good morning. What a pleasure it is to be joining you in Darwin today. It's great to have so many talented agricultural minds in the top end, and it's a privilege to be asked to present at this conference. I just thought I'd start with that short clip just to set the territory scene, and I thought it was a nice opportunity to show off some of our members. I would like to thank Jodie and the Nuffield team for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I would like to acknowledge the work that has been put into preparing this gathering. New Horizons. The theme for this year's conference is very fitting for the Northern Territory in the context of the current focus on developing the North, and it has a particular relevance to the agricultural sector. As we look towards establishing new and innovative enterprises with the potential to further enhance the sustainability of the pioneering pastoral sector. Today I want to look at how we got to where we are currently, with an overview of the history of the Northern Territory pastoral sector, a snapshot of what the industry looks like at the moment, and finally, what we at the NTCA see as the emerging opportunities for the future of the growing Northern Territory agricultural sector on pastoral leasehold land. However, before I get too much further, I'd like to give you a quick overview of the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association, who we are and what we do. The NTCA was established in 1984 with the amalgamation of 3 separate producer bodies and is today the peak industry body in the Northern Territory, representing over 90% of the Territory's pastoral industry. From small family pastoral holdings and Indigenous enterprises to large corporate entities, the NTCA formed out of a clear need for a united and strong voice, and the NTCA's mission remains to advance and protect the interests of cattle producers in the Northern Territory. NTCA members manage and are custodians of up to 700,000 square kilometres of Northern Territory landmass. and manage a total herd of over 2 million head of cattle. The NTCA works collaboratively with numerous community and industry groups and operates at a territory, national and international level. My role as the Business Development Officer with the NTCA is focused on facilitating new opportunities for pastoralists to diversify part of their pastoral leases into non-pastoral uses, such as irrigated agriculture, horticulture, aquaculture, forestry or tourism. This is an area of expanding possibilities due to recent changes to the Pastoral Land Act that allows for longer-term non-pastoral use permits with improved enterprise security, something I will discuss in further detail in a moment. The beef industry laid the foundation for the development of Northern Australia and continues to be the fabric that underpins the rural, regional and remote areas of our north. During the late 19th century, a substantial part of the territory was acquired by pastoralists under pastoral leases issued by the South Australian Government, which administered the Northern Territory from 1870 until 1911. It was on these pastoral leases the territory based much of its economic and social development. Pioneering families and Indigenous people played a critical role in the genesis of the pastoral industry and paved the way for the modern, sophisticated and progressive business enterprises in operation today. The early development of the Northern Territory was achieved on the back of beef, and beef remains the dominant agricultural commodity in today's industry. Based on the gross value of production, the beef sector remains the most important agricultural commodity in the Northern Territory. According to ABARES, in the 2014 to 15 financial year, the beef sector contributed 95% of the total value of agricultural production in the Territory, with an estimated gross value of production close to $1 billion and over $5 billion invested in land, livestock and plant and equipment. The next most important commodities after beef are melons, which contribute $35 million, and mangoes at $32 million. There are also a wide variety of horticultural crops grown in the Territory, including vegetables, grapes, cut flowers, rice, onions, garlic, and some minor crops such as limes, lemons, rambutan, dates, and dragon fruit. These minor crops are mainly sold to the Darwin market, and nearly all of the larger horticultural crops go to the domestic market, with only a small amount being exported overseas. Beef cattle receipts dominate farm incomes and accounted for an average of 88% of total enterprise earnings in the north in the 15-year period to the 15-16 financial year, as opposed to the southern region where beef contributed 48%. The beef sector has seen 150 years in the Northern Territory, where the plant-based industries are relatively young, only being established around 35 years ago. The history of how the Northern Territory was settled under pastoral leases and the fact that 45% of the territory remains as pastoral leasehold country goes some way to explaining why we see such dominance by the beef sector in the Territory over other agricultural commodities. Land in the Northern Territory is usually held as either a pastoral lease in perpetuity or as Aboriginal freehold land, and there is only a small amount of freehold country. Out of approximately 1.5 million square kilometres, the Territory only has 5,000 square kilometres held as freehold, and this is typically private houses in locations close to Darwin or other major towns. This map shows the pastoral lease area in yellow, and the purple area is Aboriginal freehold land. 45% of the Northern Territory land mass is held as a pastoral lease. There are currently 224 pastoral leases, and they cover an area just short of 600,000 square kilometres. The figure that I quoted earlier of up to 700 700,000 square kilometres being managed by NTCA members includes some Aboriginal freehold land and small portions of freehold country. So that's why the two figures don't match up there. The average size of a lease is 3,000 square kilometres, and the average herd size is around 10,000 head per property. The original purpose of this type of land tenure was to facilitate sustainable use of the land and support the pastoral sector. The lease conditions prescribe the use of the land as for pastoral purposes or other non-dominant uses essential to the pastoral enterprise, such as growing hay for stock feed. Any activity declared by the Pastoral Land Board as not for pastoral purposes is not allowable without a permit. These uses include irrigated or dryland agriculture for crops that are intended for sale off the property. It also includes horticulture, aquaculture, tourism and forestry. If a pastoral leaseholder wished to conduct one of these activities, they could apply for a non-pastoral use permit to use a portion of their lease for an activity other than a pastoral purpose. A non-pastoral use permit could be approved for one of these uses provided the pastoral enterprise remained the dominant use, covering more than 51% of the property. In the past, the non-pastoral use permits were issued for up to 5 years, but had to be renewed every year, and the permits were issued to an individual leaseholder, which meant they could not be transferred between owners if the lease was to be sold. Recent changes to the Pastoral Land Act were made in 2014 to support income diversification opportunities on the pastoral land. The Act was amended to enable non-pastoral use permits to be issued for a period of up to 30 years, with the option to renew the permit at the end of the 30-year term. The amendments also included a change to register the permit to the lease title and not the leasee, meaning that the non-pastoral use permit is registered to the lease title, which allows for the direct transfer of the permit when the ownership of the property is transferred. The non-pastoral use provisions remain as a means of providing a secondary source of income for leasees. The dominant use of a pastoral lease must still be from pastoral purposes. This is a requirement of the Pastoral Land Act and is also stated in the Native Title Act. So non-pastoral use permits are not issued for projects that would result in the total destocking of a pastoral lease. The two changes made to the non-pastoral use permit have provided greater security for leaseholders, as well as investors and wider industry service providers. The ability to plan with security for 30 years allows for investment into infrastructure and investment into researching and developing a new enterprise. It also enables leaseholders to attract investment from a third party, although there are still some challenges that exist around formal sublease arrangements for investors. Since the 2014 changes in the Pastoral Land Act, the interest in plant-based agricultural systems from new and existing leaseholders is increasing. We have seen pastoral leases being acquired as a result of their suitability for horticulture or irrigated agriculture, and we have also seen the demand for access to groundwater increase. The Northern Territory Government have invested significant funds to improve knowledge of the land resources. They are currently 3 years into a 4-year program to investigate opportunities for agricultural intensification on a range of land tenures, including pastoral and Indigenous land. The program is one of the most significant land and water assessments undertaken within the Territory, and 8 reports have been completed so far. These reports have identified 150,000 hectares of arable land. This area is in the Larrimah, Wildman, Central Barclay, Alicorung, Bathurst Island, Tennant Creek West, Gun Point and Tea Tree areas. And this area will inevitably expand as the land suitability program progresses. The slide here shows the broad categories of suitability for horticulture and agricultural crops from the north to the south of the Territory. And there are numerous crops being grown successfully in these areas that are a first for the Northern Territory. For example, Mount Kepler Station is a pastoral lease about 100 kilometres south of Darwin, where Bruce White has been trialling growing rice on the floodplain since 2011. This year, Bruce grew 70 hectares, and he has the potential to expand to 130 hectares when the conditions are right. Paul McLaughlin set up and now runs a watermelon production system 370 kilometres north of Alice Springs. This is on Aboriginal land and is the first commercial horticultural operation created on Indigenous land and the only melon production system in an area that is traditionally exclusively cattle country. Although this is not an example of diversification on a pastoral station, it is a great example of what can be grown successfully and sustainably in our rangeland landscapes. Another example of successful diversification is Rocky Hill table grapes, a grape production system set up and run by Richie and Leanne Hayes near Alice Springs. Richie Hayes is a fifth-generation cattleman who in 2002 cleared the mulga scrub to make way for grapevines. Richie and Leanne now have 60,000 white grapevines on 60 hectares, with strong demand for their product due to their ability to supply produce at times when traditional grape growing areas are unable to supply a product. They harvest their grapes when Queensland season is slowing down and the sunraysia growers haven't started picking yet. These examples of successful production systems are not the only ones that we have seen in the NT, and they show the huge potential that exists when we get it right. But on the other hand, we have also seen many ventures struggle to reach a point of sustainability and end in disappointment. Skipped one. The Northern Territory harbours enormous potential, yet suffers from a lack of enabling infrastructure, a low population base, and multiple regulations and legislation. New industry is challenged by inefficiencies connected to logistics and the supply of services, goods, and some of the things essential to human and community wellbeing. Our roads provide the lifeblood for industry and the regions, the means to move, connect, supply, support and trade. In the modern operating environment, it is critical that business has the capacity to supply their product year-round, and not just when the grader has been or the creek goes down. Quality of roads and the distance to markets and processing facilities are often the critical limiting factor to new developments. The enabling infrastructure starts at the farm level, and the cost of establishing the required infrastructure essentially rules out any of the lower value crops. If we look at the cost of capital for establishing an irrigation system on a greenfield site, we are looking at considerable investment into bores, pivots, fencing, and the plant and equipment needed for harvesting and processing. Where tree clearing and site preparation is required, the costs are even higher. This means we are now only looking at high-value crops that are able to produce the net rate of return required to generate a profit. Historically, this has been a huge challenge given the non-pastoral use permits were only issued for a 5-year period. This essentially required a 5-year business plan and crops that pay for the development costs of an irrigation system in this time. A big ask and something that cannot be achieved by most broadacre cropping systems. Extending the permits to provide security for 30 years goes some way to addressing the gross margin challenges faced by NT producers. But a producer can still expect a considerable lag time before seeing a positive return on investment. Producers also face challenges around access and reliability of water. Much of the development opportunities within the Territory rely on groundwater and the equitable sharing of available water between users. The Department of Primary Industry study I mentioned earlier aims to increase knowledge of the available water resources to ensure this is done sustainably, and it is widely accepted that knowing how much water we have and having the appropriate legislative framework for the effective management of the water is fundamental to success. Northern Australia is part of the Southeast Asian economic region, the fastest growing in the world, a fact that I'm confident you have heard before. Our proximity to Asia provides the Australian economy and Australian business with huge opportunities. There is agreement on the rise of Asia, and this is the trend that is of greatest importance to the Northern Territory and wider Northern Australia, particularly in terms of increasing demand from Asia. Today, there are an estimated 500 million middle-class people in Asia. That figure is expected to rise to 1.7 billion by 2020 and to more than 3.2 billion by 2030, when they will account for 66% of the global middle class. Both the National Intelligence Council and the CSIRO agree that food production will need to increase greatly. CSIRO estimates food production will need to increase 70% by 2050. It has been said that Northern Australia can grasp its full potential and become an economic powerhouse within our great country, and that our North's future will come from its people, its ingenuity, its diversity, and its proximity to Asia. It is an exciting time to be a primary producer in the Northern Territory. We have the resources, the connections across the tropics, and the land, skills and institutions that the Indo-Pacific needs. A region that has the savings and the markets to drive our future prosperity. The sector faces significant challenges as it grows to meet this demand, and investment in increasing our knowledge and understanding of the challenges we face, the resources we rely on, and the market advantages that exist due to our unique climate and location is a priority in ensuring we realise the potential of agriculture in the Northern Territory. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference and your visit to the Northern Territory. Thanks for your time.